Well, it's official. 4 years and 82 Grand Prix later, Daniel Ricciardo is back at Red Bull. Tell me, Danny, was it worth it? Let's take a look at the timeline briefly. In the middle of 2018, Daniel Ricciardo makes his decision to leave Red Bull Racing, where he was, at the time, first driver. Or, well, more like equal driver with Max Verstappen. He wasn't really liking the whole unreliability of the car at the time, and he could see that the writing was on the wall in the way that the team was gravitating around his teammate Max Verstappen. So he made the decision to leave and go to Renault instead. So he goes to Renault, and it takes him a few races to get up to speed, but eventually he does start performing reasonably well in this midfield car, though he doesn't get any podiums, which is kind of understandable. The Renault is never going to be as good as a Red Bull. Then 2020 comes along, and he has his best year at Renault. He gets 2 podiums, he scores a 4th place and 2 fastest laps. He does really well, and the team freely acknowledges that they have included Daniel in their long-term plans to hopefully one day win championships with them. Who can blame them? Daniel was a quality driver, and their car really did seem to suit him. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have been in the position to take those podiums in the first place. Unfortunately, before the 2020 season even started, he made an announcement to say that he would leave the team to go to McLaren to replace the Ferrari-bound Carlos Sainz. Renault's then team principal Cyril Abiteboul said in an interview that he was confident that Daniel Ricciardo would come to regret his decision to leave Renault so quickly. Daniel, on the other hand, was confident. He said he wanted to win championships with McLaren. He was impressed with the progress the team had made since 2018, and I believe he even said he wanted to see his career end at McLaren. How pathetic those words would come to be. So 2021 rolls around, and Daniel doesn't immediately start performing, but that's okay. It took him a few races to get back up to speed with the Renault. It took him a little while for him to start driving the nuts off that car. It would surely be no time at all until Daniel was doing the same with the McLaren. At round 5 of the championship in Monaco, Daniel got lapped by his teammate Lando Norris. And whilst he was scoring points, he was always behind his teammate. Almost always behind, at least, because he was somehow in front in Italy, where he got that pretty magical win at the Temple of Speed, with his teammate right behind him, scoring the only 1-2 of the 2021 season. And at that point, everyone thought that Danny Ric was back, except 2 races later, he went to sleep again. And aside from 2 5th-place finishes in the USA and Saudi Arabia, he finished pretty consistently in P12 and P13. And then 2022 comes along, and everyone is vaguely hoping that Daniel will start performing again. Like, he's had a year to get used to the McLaren, he'll start doing well now, and he just didn't. Now, sure, the McLaren MCL36, not the greatest car on earth, but he only scored in consecutive races once. A pair of 9th place finishes in Austria and France. Across the 22 race season, Daniel scored 7 times. 8 if you include his sprint points at Imola. By contrast, his teammate Lando Norris failed to score 5 times. Or 4 if you include his sprint points at Brazil. Yes, the MCL36 was not a great car, but at least Lando Norris was able to make it perform pretty consistently. Daniel Ricciardo, no. We saw flashes of brilliance, like his charge at Mexico, but that was pretty much it. So it's no wonder that McLaren dropped Daniel Ricciardo by mutual agreement, apparently, because Daniel apparently saw that he wasn't performing well either. And so he doesn't have a drive for 2023 now, and he may never get another drive again. Who knows? So, yeah, Daniel's words of wanting to end his career at McLaren, perhaps a bit too true, and definitely not in the way he intended. So, where did it all go wrong for Danny Ric? Well, you could argue it happened the moment he decided to leave Red Bull, and yeah, he has come full circle in that regard. He did leave a position, a race driver position, and now he's come back to a third driver position, which is certainly worse because, he's not racing for them. He's not on the grid. He's just a reserve driver, at best. But Daniel wanted to remain the first driver, the number one. But it was clear to him that Red Bull was starting to see Max as number one, despite the colour of his T-cam. So Daniel wanted to leave and become first driver somewhere. And that somewhere was Renault. It is my opinion now that Daniel should never have left Renault. The team definitely wanted to keep him there. He seemed pretty happy there. And the car was suited to him. They wanted him to be their champion. But Daniel didn't see the future in Renault. And given the events of this year, he was just the first in a long line of people who have left the Enstone team because, well, there seems to be something rotten about Renault/Alpine. Daniel didn't stay at Renault because he didn't think they were capable of championships, and he wanted a championship. Sure, they could give him a decent car, they could have him as their first driver forever, they really wanted him to stay, but something about that team made Daniel not want to stay. And with the whole Oscar Piastri fiasco, we know that something is wrong with that team. First, Alain Prost left his advisor role. Cyril Abiteboul got kicked out, or maybe he left of his own accord. I don't remember. Back at the end of 2020, Fernando Alonso, who Renault chose to replace Daniel Ricciardo, announced his move to Aston Martin one day after Sebastian Vettel announced his retirement. So Alpine announces Oscar Piastri as Alonso's replacement, but then he comes out a few hours later and says, I haven't signed a contract, I'm not going to drive for Alpine next year. Yes, Daniel Ricciardo probably would have been performing better had he not left Renault/Alpine. But he didn't think that they were going to be capable of delivering what he wanted. More race wins and a championship. So you can understand why he left. But he probably should have tried to stay for a little bit longer because he changed teams a bit too quickly. His McLaren years are a bit of a dark mark in his career because he wanted to drive for them. He wanted to perform well for them. And sure, he did deliver them a single Grand Prix victory, which was incredible. The first McLaren victory since 2012, but it just wasn't enough. If he had been performing like that from day one, he would still be with McLaren. He would still be racing for them. But he wasn't like that. He was struggling a lot. And being struck down with COVID during one of the pre-season tests, I don't remember which one, which is really annoying. But that certainly didn't help his trying to get used to the McLaren car, which just behaved too differently from what he was used to. The Red Bull and the Renault had, from what I understand, fairly strong front ends, which was something that Daniel could get to grips with. He knew how to drive a car like that. But with the McLaren, the front end has been pretty weak, actually, and it has a strong rear end, which is how Lando likes to drive it, which is how Carlos liked to drive it. With Daniel, not so much. And if you remember to the Red Bull days, Daniel was nicknamed the last of the late breakers due to the Red Bull's very strong brakes. The Renault had some good brakes as well. They were not as good as the Red Bulls, but the McLaren's brakes have been something that he just hasn't been able to get used to, and he's just been struggling with the McLaren for so long. So why did he somehow manage to win the 2021 Italian Grand Prix? Well, I reckon it's because Monza is not exactly a difficult track to master. The MCL35M proved itself to be pretty handy in a straight line, and after just one practice session, that was probably all Daniel needed to understand how to drive the circuit with that car, and yeah, from that point on, he was unstoppable. So now that Daniel has come full circle, he left Red Bull, and now 4 years later he's come back, was it really worth it? Well, he certainly got some experience driving different cars, but I can't really say it was worth it. Like I said, if he'd been performing at a high level from the instant he got into that McLaren, no, we wouldn't be here today making this sort of video. But instead, here we are. So it's my opinion that Daniel was probably correct in his decision to leave Red Bull in the first place, but he should never have left Renault. I think that was where he messed up. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.